lefty feminist supporting Twitter mob types who will beef them up, who will support them no matter what, who aren't interested in facts. They're only interested in the narrative. They're not interested in whether or not what she says is true. They're interested in making her feel good. And this is a problem because when you have psychologically vulnerable people who are fighting wars that, where the facts don't really support them, the worst thing you can do is, if you like, sustain the delusion with a lot of well-meaning but ultimately stupid supporters who will tell her whatever she wants to hear to buoy her mood that day. And yes, what this leads to is the sort of narcissistic, delusional stuff that she wrote in Bustle.
Would you say that sort of thinking is characteristic of the left these days, kind of more generally? There's sort of between feminists and trans people are not exactly on the best terms recently, as a piece you guys ran at Breitbart London pointed out recently.
Yeah, I wrote that story. Yes, what we're seeing at the moment, I think, and this is a battle that has advanced further in the UK than it has in the US, but it's coming to you guys, so it's worth you listening to us because we've lived through it. It's one of the few things that we export to America rather than the other way around. We send you socialized healthcare and authoritarian leftism. So you're welcome. We take culture and all the other great things that you have. Basically, there's a rift at the moment in the left between the authoritarian, nannying, sort of finger-wagging control freaks of the feminist and transsexual and sort of third wave feminists, the sort of people who want to censor things, the people who use words like problematic,
the people and all of the Nietzsche Club banned from UCL, things like that.
Exactly. The people who want to ban national newspapers from student union campuses, all that kind of stuff. What's worrying about that particular strain is it tends to consist of young, well-educated millennials, all of whose media sources are similarly these very authoritarian leftist views. So if you think anything that Gawker publishes, anything that Vox publishes, even Vice these days to a certain extent, everything that they're reading is telling them that the narrative matters more than the truth, that safe spaces and nobody getting offended or hurt matters more than having an open, free debate. What they're losing is the fact that free speech and open debate and free inquiry is the cornerstone of our intellectual history. It is what makes us who we are.
I'm thinking of Ezra Klein's piece about how the new consent laws would be terrible. They would prosecute innocent people. They would, but we should do them anyway.
Absolutely, and that's typical of their thinking. Freedom, justice, freedom of thought, as well as freedom of speech, all these things are getting thrown out of the window. And that sort of muscular classical liberalism is being completely ceded to the right. And that's why Gamergaters, who reflexively think of themselves as left-wing, who if you ask them would say, well, obviously I'm a lefty, are all now reading places like Breitbart. And it would have been inconceivable to them 6 months ago they would read Breitbart, or indeed the Daily Caller, which has published good stuff on this too. These are not the news sources that Gamergaters ever envisaged themselves reading, but they're coming there because they're the only places that give them a fair hearing.
Now, when you say there's a divide on the left, and that sort of bespeaks that they're almost refugees, that the divide doesn't really exist, because there really isn't much left. I mean, the people on the quote-unquote classical liberal left that still kind of exist, like your Brendan O'Neills, your Jonathan Chaits, and things like that, there really seems to be very few of them, and there are a certain model of old-school journalist type, as opposed to, the foot soldiers, the millennials that you're talking about. They very much accept these, anti-liberal authoritarian platitudes that we need to no-platform people. We need to take, make sure certain events don't happen on campuses and things like that. Right. And that sort of ideological hegemony is what's forcing these Gamergaters to sort of explore new things. But it seems like it's the reason for that is not that there's a civil war brewing. It's that there isn't enough of one.
Well, I don't know about that. I think what's happened is that the previous generation of leftist activists, and let's take an example from something else. We'll take an example from, actually, let's go back to trans and gay rights. The previous generation of feminists and gay campaigners, people like Peter Tatchell, Germaine Greer, Julie Bindel in the UK, these are big international icons of gay rights who have been, if you like, fighting for transsexuals' rights to, live their lives and have state-funded transition surgery and all that kind of stuff. They've been fighting for this stuff for 40 years. They sowed the seeds when they were at their professional height. They sowed the seeds of these ideas about safe spaces for women. They sowed the seeds about no platforming. They were the people who said that certain people should not be allowed to speak at universities. And Brendan O'Neill would have been is of that generation, but he would have been fighting on the other side from the left and saying, no, we should hear these people out. They'll hang themselves with their own arguments if they're wrong, all the rest of it. What's happened is a generation below the Tatchells and below the Germaine Greers has taken this to heart and has run away and has got carried away with it. There is a perfectly good argument for no platforming some people. There's a perfectly good argument for providing safe spaces for some people under some circumstances some of the time. But
as opposed to now you've got the Oxford pro-life conference getting shut down.
Exactly. What's happened is that an entire generation who have come after that big wave of civil rights campaigners have forgotten that the safe spaces and the no platforming were there as a buffer and there as a sort of security, as a sort of last line of defense in the case of very extreme speakers and very extreme ideas. And now it's where they go first if they imagine that someone somewhere might claim to be upset by a debate. For example, I think my friend Tim Stanley and somebody else from, who was it? I don't remember. Somebody else was going to debate abortion in Cambridge. That debate was cancelled on the hypothetical basis that someone somewhere at Cambridge University might be upset by somebody debating whether abortion was morally justified. Now, that's the most extraordinary thing to have occurred in one of the greatest universities in the world, for a place that is specifically designed. If you go to one of these great universities and take advantage of the resources and speak to these great thinkers precisely to challenge yourself, to encounter great big ideas, to work out how you feel about things. But what's happening on university campuses, which is an extraordinary situation, is that university campuses are becoming one of the worst places when it comes to free speech. Well, university campuses run by these young guys who have read the works of Germaine Greer and authors like that, and who have found this sort of safe space stuff and decided that they can use it on a daily basis as a weapon in their arsenal against people whose opinions they don't like. And
you're speaking of the president of the Cambridge Union, Tim Squirrel, who kind of defended the no platforming decision about the pro-life conference.
Exactly. Now, I know Tim. He's a nice guy, but he is definitely wrong about this, and in fact, he's wrong about everything. But he is uncompromising about the fact that, A, he's in the minority, which he doesn't care about. He knows that it's the people who run student unions and the people who are in student journalism who are the most vocal about this sort of no platforming and safe space stuff. But he doesn't care about that, and he's absolutely uncompromising that if a debate might cause somebody to claim to be upset, there is a reasonable justification for shutting that debate down on a British university campus. I find that horrifying. Most people find that horrifying. Muscular, classical liberals on the left find it utterly horrifying. People like Brendan O'Neill, you mentioned earlier, find it utterly horrifying, but it is the situation that the left currently finds itself in. I think it's a little more advanced in Britain. I think you're having some of the same problems in the US, primarily because new media, the stuff that is coming in to replace the newspapers that the millennials are reading, is uniformly authoritarian left. What we might call authoritarian left. There is no exception anywhere on the chain. All of these new media organizations, everything that was set up in the last sort of 10, 15 years, all of them take the same view. There isn't a single classical, liberal, free inquiry, free speech defending millennial publication out there. And that is really worrying.
So let's go back to Gamergate. We're almost out of time, but let me just say a word for the non-gamer crowd. What should we really be worried about? What's going on in Gamergate? Why does it matter to a non-gamer? Like, should these people just be going out and playing outside once their games become all feminists, or?
Well, I've certainly written stuff like that in the past, so I'll tell you why I think my opinion's changed and why I think it matters. The reason video games matter is it's already a bigger industry than Hollywood in financial terms. I think PricewaterhouseCoopers estimated that at the end of last year it'd be worth something like $85 to $87 billion. We care much more about what entertains us than what educates us. We spend more money on education than we spend on news. Andrew Breitbart used to say that politics is downstream from culture, and he was right. We are touched and moved and shaped more by the things that we consume in the movie theater than anything we see on news programs. Now, video games in some cases are very complex, very emotionally engaging and enriching life experiences for some people, and they shape the way that people vote, the way that people communicate with one another, how they form relationships. This is really fundamental, basic, important human stuff. And video games are going to be so much bigger than anything that has happened in movie theaters or whatever. You know, having looked at the scale of this stuff, how many young people play these immersive video games, it's difficult to say that it wouldn't be a similar sort of impact and revolution than the printed word. It is going to be more as culturally significant as the advent of the internet for an entire generation of people. And right now, the battle is being waged for the soul of this industry. Whether it's going to be an industry of free expression and free ideas, and it's going to investigate all possibilities, sometimes deal with difficult issues, and be a market-driven, pluralistic, creative, artistic medium, or if it's going to be a heavily policed and miserable sort of box-checking exercise. And the reason that people are worried about it is that they have seen this happen before in comic books, in sci-fi, in fantasy. One by one, all these fandoms collapsed and gave in to the social justice warriors, started retroactively turning characters gay, black, lesbian, disabled. You know, they feed all this stuff in. The quality of the stories plummets in favor of the elevation of identity politics, and fans suffer. Sales of sci-fi books have plummeted since sci-fi basically gave itself over to the social justice warriors. Gamers are the first fandom who have fought back, and video gaming is by far the biggest of these fandoms, and it is going to affect everybody. Everybody's going to play video games in 10 years' time. It's going to be the most important entertainment medium that the species has ever seen, and it's going to affect people far more than what they think about politicians, and that's why I think it's worth fighting.
There you have it, folks. This is Milo Yiannopoulos, Associate Editor at Breitbart and a Chief Gamergate reporter. Thanks a lot for being here, Milo.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, we got to go to break now.